I'm assuming you probably have a response for Mr. Hasset.
Well, this has been one of the most historically strong economic recoveries in decades. And certainly this jobs report, which is the last one under President Biden, the data, the survey was done on the 12th. So certainly when the president was still in office is reflective of that. Even though job growth came in slower than expected, we did see the unemployment rate pop down to 4%, 143,000 jobs created. That makes for a total of over 16 million over the president's term in office. An unemployment rate over the 4 years is lower than any president since Johnson in the late 1960s. This has been an historically strong recovery and a historically strong labor market recovery.
But this does look to be a labor market that is cooling, at least in some way. Heather, even for everything that was experienced over the next 4 years, I do wonder what this signals to you about what's ahead in the next year, in the next several months, if a downturn might become more precipitous suddenly.
Well, a lot has changed over the past couple of months. As Donald Trump has started to really get clear on his economic priorities and where he's going to take the country. One of the other bits of data that we got out today was new numbers on consumer sentiment from Michigan that indicate that people have growing concerns about the economy. They are looking out in the future and they say, hey, we think that inflation is going to pop up, and we're not thinking that things are going in the right direction. And, really, when you look at what's been happening and you look at the fact that Donald Trump got elected saying he was going to do things for America's middle class, and yet he has not been focused on that. He's been focused on tax cuts for the wealthy. He's been focused on not making sure that people have the kinds of protections that they need in workplaces around the country, and certainly not focusing on the kinds of industries that are going to drive American competitiveness into the future, like clean energy. He is really, taking this economy in a very different direction. And I think that is indicated in these new confidence numbers that have come out.
Well, especially as we consider we're getting more from him on tariffs today, or at least he today told us we'll get more on tariffs next week, as he's talking about reciprocal tariffs that he could introduce as early as Monday or Tuesday, according to the president. Heather, in addition to all of the other tariff threats that are out there, he suggested that he wants to get rid of U.S. trade deficits with other countries, make everything equal. Is that economically feasible? And if we do see reciprocal tariffs, what is the economic impact of that?
Listen, President Trump right now is just sowing economic chaos. And, he is making these claims about tariffs and then not following through, while on the other hand, he has freed his friend, Elon Musk, this billionaire, to go through the American government and decide what is important and what isn't. And, trying to make cuts to what payments are going out in the government, freezing the funds to really important programs that are helping communities and working families all across the country. So when you look at this whole issue, the way that the president is thinking about the economy, where he's freeing billionaires to do what they want to do, not addressing corporate power, and he is, again, focused on tax cuts for the rich, while, talking about tariffs, it really is not moving in the right direction.
Well, you raised Elon Musk and the DOGE efforts, Heather, and that's something that was discussed earlier today when Texas Governor Greg Abbott was asked by my colleague Julie Fine about this. This is what he had to say about Musk's influence in this administration.
He's going to have success in the government sector like he has in the private sector. One thing we desperately need in our country is to shrink government. The government has grown too large. And one way to save money for taxpayers and make government more efficient is to do exactly what Elon is doing. And I think most Americans are very proud of what he's accomplishing.
So, Heather, when we consider this notion of shrinking government, obviously there are buyout offers that have been made, a deadline extended to Monday, but tens of thousands of people already taking them up on that, and a suggestion from officials that if not enough people take it, they're just going to start reducing headcount at these agencies, looking for somewhere in the ballpark of 5 to 10% of the federal civilian workforce. How would you expect that to show up in economic data?
This is sowing chaos, and quite frankly, it's economic mismanagement. You know, one of the things that Donald Trump did is he froze the contracts and payments that were already in line to be done across the economy from the federal government. That is chaotic. That means that people can't make decisions. They did some work. They're trying to get their money from the government, and it's now not coming. And now, we have important roles that government officials play all across the country. At the Transportation Safety Administration, at all sorts of things across the country, and we aren't doing this in a way that is sane and sensible. And then here's the thing: they are taking an axe in a way that is inconsistent with what the American people want and the kinds of programs and supports that will actually help middle-class families all across the country and make the investments that we need to see to grow the economy. Instead of this, we have this economic mismanagement, we have this chaos, and we have a lack of focus on what's going to help middle-class families thrive.
Well, so when we consider all of this and the notion of the federal workforce and how that factors in to the labor market, we also have questions now under this administration about the migrant workforce. We know that immigration did play a role in the kind of data that we were seeing during your time at the White House, during the Biden administration. Now that deportations have begun, and they obviously would like to scale those up even further, how do you anticipate that changing labor market dynamic, specifically for some of these lower wage sectors of the economy that migrant workers typically fill when Americans don't want those jobs?
Well, here's the thing. We have had workers from, immigrants taking jobs across the economy that are important. And certainly this across-the-board fear that is being created by Donald Trump and his administration is going to have an effect on those communities and their ability to participate fully in our economy. And I think we will see the effects of that in the future in the labor market data.
I'd like to ask you one more thing. As we had the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent on Bloomberg yesterday, he was asked about monetary policy, which he made clear he would rather not weigh in on, just like you didn't like to weigh in on monetary policy when you were still at the White House, Heather. But his suggestion was they are not so much concerned as to whether the Fed's going to be hiking or cutting. They're just going to focus on their own fiscal efforts to bring rates down and bring mortgage rates and that kind of thing down with them. How easy is that to accomplish realistically? And if you could do that with fiscal policy alone, would the White House you worked for not have done so?
Well, certainly we had a robust housing policy and, of course, many pieces that weren't able to get across the finish line in Congress, but certainly a lot of effort on the supply side of the economy. I mean, here's the thing. This kind of economic chaos is not good for markets. It's certainly, leading to a lot of people concerned about rising inflation. And, of course, that means that the Fed is not going to be lowering rates. And, of course, that affects investment in housing and the ability of consumers to afford housing. So, actually, I'm very concerned that we are not going to see the kinds of progress that we need to make in the housing market because, again, this administration is focused on benefiting billionaires, giving tax cuts for the wealthy, and not focused on the kitchen table issues that American middle-class families and families all across the country need to see.